This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
Hi, we're doing an event with Bob Nelson next week. He's going to talk to the screenwriting students at UC Santa Barbara.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we want to ask you a question. So when you first read the script, what really drew you to your character?
Well, I think that it's so sparse, and whatever he has down there means something. I mean, it's not a lot of verbiage, you know. And I just felt that she was a wonderful lady, and I really knew her. I mean, I felt when I read her that I knew who she was. I knew why she was doing what she was doing.
The cemetery scene is the one that really grabbed me emotionally because Bruce Dern's about to cry, and you're just being hysterical. That was such a great marital dynamic. Is that something you worked with Bruce to develop, or did you?
No, in fact, that was the first scene I shot. So, and I yelled at Alexander, "This is hard." He said, "Well, we'll do it, don't worry." And we did. Of course, you always do. But, I mean, to be faced with that on my first day. And Bruce and Will had done some scenes together, so they were a little closer than I was with them. But it was wonderful. I mean, from day one, it was that script and Alexander, they meshed. They really did.
And how exciting it is sharing all the Oscar nominations with all your great collaborators.
It's great. We go and we have a whole table of Nebraskans, and it's wonderful.
Thank you so much, and good luck tonight. Thank you so much. You're watching the Script to Screen show, and the Script to Screen examines a translation of the script to the screen by writers, of course, directors, actors, and producers. It is brought to you by the UC Department of Film and Media Studies, Carsey Wolf Center, and more importantly, it's brought to you by these lovely Pollak Theater interns you see behind the cameras. They put this event together in 9 days, produced, marketed, and now are shooting it live as a TV show. So pat them on the back on the way out. You know, they do a great job of making me look good, which is not so easy. Today, we're proud to have shown Nebraska. Nebraska's gotten 6 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Director Alexander Payne, Best Actor Bruce Dern, Best Supporting Actress June Squibb, Best Cinematographer, and of course, Best Original Screenplay written by Bob Nelson. So please welcome to the Pollak Theater stage, Bob Nelson. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. We have so much to talk about this wonderfully textured film. I'm so excited that you joined us. But the obvious first question to me was, the drive to LA to Santa Barbara is about 120 miles. How long did it take you?
Well, if I hadn't got lost in Oxnard for a little bit, probably could have done the hour and a half. But I wanted to see some of the scenery up there and some of the dead ends. And so,
hour and a half. Just let you know, I can do it in 20 minutes.
I'm sure you can.
So we talked to you at the Writers Guild last week, and you mentioned you began writing the script in 2002. What inspired you first to write this script?
Unemployment, desperation, and fear was what first started it. I don't know how many of you probably grew up with Bill Nye the Science Guy, right? Well, I started on a Seattle show in the 90s with Bill Nye, and that's how he wound up getting his own PBS show. And the show I was on with him, almost live, ended towards the end of the century. And so I was out of work, and I was getting ready to come down to Los Angeles. And I had friends in the TV business, but none in movies. But a friend in TV said, besides writing a Simpsons and Everybody Loves Raymond, they really like to read film scripts now, just to see how you deal with story and character, even if you're trying to get a TV job. And I thought, well, that's a good idea because it'll be a reading sample, and I'll also have some low-budget film script that I can shop around as well. So fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it now, this was the only idea I had for a movie. So that's what I did. I wrote this one up, and while I was doing that show for Bill Nye before I moved down here, a producer from LA came up to work on it. Her name is Julie Thompson, and you can see her name now on the credits as an executive producer. And she read the script while she was producing the Nye show and said, I know a man, Ron Yerxa, who's a producer in LA, who might enjoy this type of very small film, tiny story. So she got it to Ron, and they optioned it. And that's how it happened. I mean, in between there somewhere, I guess I wrote it. It's hard to remember. It's been so long. But it was a little struggle for me to write because I'd never written anything more than 5 minutes before writing sketches. And even a lot of those sagged in the middle. So the thought of trying to write an hour and 45-minute story was very daunting, and it took me quite a while.
So why the location Nebraska? Hawaii's warmer. There are other places that you could.
Well, you know, it's funny is when they were shooting. I was there for a week, but most of the time they were shooting in the cold, especially in Montana. I was at home in the Seattle area in a nice warm room. Well, and I just picked Montana off a map, and now here's all these people out there in 10-degree weather shooting my film. So I felt a little bad, but my family is from Nebraska. They moved when I was 6 weeks old because I said, let's get the hell out of here. But as I was growing up, I used to go back and visit the relatives on the farms in small towns, and I grew to love the place. And I got to know, my dad himself had 17 siblings, and that's where those uncles come from that you see in the movie. Those are my uncles. And as a brother of mine, who, when he first saw the movie, mentioning that scene where they're watching TV and talking about cars, he said, that's not writing, that's dictation. Because that was our childhood. But they were great guys, we loved them. So my mom and dad met in northeast Nebraska, right in the area where they shot. And I just, besides the Seattle area, that's the part of the country I knew the best, and I really hadn't seen a lot of it on screen. So I thought this could be an unusual setting as well. So it's knowing the people, knowing the setting. Woody Grant there is a representation of my own father. And so I started out using some true family stories. My dad was a mechanic, and he drank, and he'd loan out his tools. And on the air compressor, that really happened. He loaned out an air compressor, never got it back. But what I didn't put in the movie is he even loaned out a truck of his and never saw it again. So, you know, the ending of this movie is really wish fulfillment on my part all these years later. My dad's been gone a long time. But this is me getting my dad his truck and his compressor back, finally.
So I mean, so obviously, it's very personal to you. Was it difficult for you to find the humor? Because you're basing this on your own life, but finding the humor in some of the tragedy also. That's right.
It's hard, but the filmmakers I grew up really appreciating, like Billy Wilder and Hal Ashby in the 70s, and when Alexander Payne came along, these were people who were mixing drama and comedy in that ugly word dramedy that we all hate. But many years ago, a movie was just a movie. It didn't necessarily have to be classified. So yeah, it was a little difficult, and I came from a strictly comedy background, writing sketches and jokes. So writing the drama was difficult, and that was the hardest part for me to plot out. One of the first scenes that I came up with was stealing the air compressor, because I'd been brainstorming my own life and my own stories, and I wanted that to be part of it. So I wrote that scene, and then I wrote a few of the other more humorous scenes, and then I kind of built the drama around that, because I just felt more comfortable writing comedy to start with. But I knew I wanted to do something a little different. I didn't want to do a flat-out comedy.
Yeah, my favorite bit in the comedy pit with the compressor is the mom, June Squibb, who has been railing on every person living in that town, except those two people they stole the compressor.
Yes.
Salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was one of my favorite moments.
Well, and again, coming back to why trying to integrate the comedy in there as well, when I first plotted this out, June Squibb's character did not make it past the first act. But as I was looking at it, I thought I need someone to provide some humor later on. That'll make me feel more comfortable. And by doing that and coming up with the cemetery scene, it also made me think of ways to use Kate as part of the storyline and the drama. And that's how I came up later, much later in the plotting, with her having the confrontation with the family and telling them off in such a vivid term at the end. So luckily, all of that came from that. But when I first met June Squibb on the set, I walked up to her and introduced myself and said, I don't know how many of you have seen About Schmidt, but in About Schmidt, she's killed off in Act 1. She dies on the floor of the kitchen. And I came up to her and said, you know, you almost died again in Act 1 of this movie. But I decided we needed Kate in Hawthorne somehow. It
was amazing because we interviewed her last week at the Guild Awards too, and she said that was her first scene was the cemetery scene she shot.
Yes.
And it freaked her out a little. It's like, oh my God, this is an intense scene.
If you know how movies are shot, and especially low-budget movies do not have the luxury of shooting in order, especially at this budget. So when they're looking at locations and where they're going to be, it's pretty much we're going to shoot this scene and this scene and this scene that day because the trucks will all be there. We don't have to move them and pay everybody for an extra day. So that's what happened. June Squibb showed up and they took her out to the cemetery. And as she said, she was trying to do it. She hadn't really been able to get into her character yet. So she's trying to play it different ways. And she said she yelled over at Alexander, "This is hard." Especially for a first day. And he said, "Don't worry, we'll find it."
Well, it was great. It summed up her character, but at the same time, Woody's going through a lot of pain in that scene, all in his face. So is that something challenging for you when writing Woody? Because a lot of his pain is internal.
Yeah. And in that scene, I'd have to look at the script again, but I do not think in my script that I'm writing in there, she's saying this and Woody is reacting this way. That staging is director Alexander Payne, and I really like that because, as you say, you have her saying these outrageous things, whether you find them funny or not. There's this, absurd thing going on, but in Woody's face, you can see the pain that these memories are causing him. And earlier, before he went to Hawthorne in the hospital, he says, "I don't want to go to Hawthorne," and this is probably one of the reasons to confront not only the people who are still living, but also the people that he's lost over the years, including siblings.
It's interesting because Woody basically always says what he wants. I don't want to go to Hawthorne. He always says he doesn't want to go.
Yeah, he just says it much shorter than Kate does.
Exactly. And I did love the moment when he first saw his brother after how many years, we were assuming? A long time? Hey.
Yes.
That was the extent of their conversation.
And that's, if any of you know, the brother wonderfully played by Rance Howard, who is Ron Howard's dad. And when I saw that Rance Howard was going to play that part, I thought, oh, that's perfect, because I knew his work, and he actually looks like my uncles. But there are a whole bunch of family stories about my dad and his uncles, and even his sisters were not big talkers either. You can get them going, but since there were 17 siblings, there was such an age difference that my dad was one of the youngest, and he had these brothers who could have been his own dad. And then when we moved out to Washington State, he was in a tavern and talking to these people and talking to this guy. And finally, people figured out. One of them said, "Do you know that this is your brother?" They'd been talking for half an hour. And that's probably what they did. They said, "Oh, hey, how you doing?"
So you touched on it. So Davey is a little like you, then David?
That's where it started. I mean, things change as you write the script and you try and incorporate different things. And then when you have someone like Will Forte doing such a great job making the character himself his own, and Alexander Payne directing. But the basic thought was going back to when I was a teenager and these things were happening to my dad. And how do you deal with someone who has an addiction? Some days you feel frustrated and not so generous, and other days you just try and do the best you can by them. And in this sense, with David, trying to give his dad some dignity. So in a way, David and Ross as brothers almost are, there's two sides of the same coin. They could have just as easily been one character who just kept waffling back and forth on how he wanted to treat his dad. But I like the idea of bringing a brother into it, and also that Ross could come in later as well as Kate to help push the story along.
And it was also a great fist fight between the cousins and Ross.
Yeah, I didn't imagine it. I didn't imagine it that way, but I loved it when I saw the dailies that it's these two guys. You want to go? You want to go? Yeah, and then it's a slap fight, of course. I mean, Ross, he's on TV. He doesn't want to get hit, but what's the other cousin doing? He's just a coward, I guess. Yeah.
So obviously, like, it's interesting when David learns about his father. I found little things like they throw him a girlfriend, the affair, but at the same time, Ed Pegram took advantage of him. There was some really interesting way of learning. Is it kind of fascinating for you that he couldn't talk to his dad about this, but had to learn from all the other people? Yeah,
and when I first had the idea for the script, it was based on a news story that this actually happened. People would travel cross country to a sweepstakes office and try to collect their money, and that's why this was the only idea I had, and it stuck in my head. But I kept thinking of this as, it could be a small independent movie that's strictly a road trip where it's father and son going from there to Lincoln, and along the way you would have the ups and downs, the arguments, the reconciliations, and all of that. But all of the information about his dad's past would have to come from the dad himself. So it would be direct delivery of exposition. So when I thought of them going through the dad's hometown, that's when I actually thought I might be able to make a movie out of it, because then David is going to learn from his dad. He's going to learn from Ed. He's going to learn from the woman at the newspaper office, the other relatives. So I think that's a little nicer way to try and keep it entertaining as well.
And how much fun was it, right, the scene when he punched Ed in the face?
Well,
because we all wanted to do it the whole movie.
Was everyone hoping he'd punch him in the face? Yeah. I mean, that's another interesting story about how these things progress. When I wrote the scene, I was very worried about that, in that not that Ed doesn't necessarily deserve it, but he is an older guy, so it's a little risky. So in my version, when David walks up to him, he's there and it's like he wants to punch him, and then he maybe makes a motion like he'd like to brush him off, and Ed sees that as a punch coming. So Ed actually took the first punch in the original script. Now Alexander changed that to show that everything that had been happening to David in his life and on this trip, and now knowing this Ed Pegram and what the things he had done to his own dad, he wanted to bring David to a boil and just let it explode. And that's why you see him just turning around and clocking the guy.
I also, one of my other favorite scenes was the teeth scene.
Yes.
Where Will Forte does a great joke, it's not your teeth, but you actually convinced us in the script that he actually wasn't his teeth. Bruce Dern did a great job delivering your lines. Was that kind of fun, like pulling that off?
Well, again, like I said, a few of these things came from real life. My dad, being a mechanic, he was in World War II and was shot down. And when he came back, everyone said he was much quieter, and he's definitely changed by the war. But another true scene is actually losing the teeth by the railroad tracks. And my wife is here again, and I always have to point this out when she's in the audience. There she is, right over there. And she's a little pissed about that scene because my wife and I had gone over to my dad's house one day, and we were talking, and all of a sudden he did say, "Where are my teeth?" And we started looking around, and then he said, "Well, maybe they are by the tracks because I fell down there last night coming back from the tavern." So the three of us went over there, and we looked for the teeth, And Valerie was actually the one who found them, and she is so pissed because I wrote her out of the movie. So sorry about that, but it would have just been weird to have some strange woman walk by and find them at that point. Things like that really did happen. Now the exchange, I did not tease my dad that these weren't his teeth. That was added for the script.
And of course, the scene we're all dreading in the movie is what will happen when he actually finds out it's a scam. Mm-hmm. How did you approach that scene? Because that's really the climax. It's just kind of, were you really concerned? How the balance on that?
Well, I felt the one drawback I had when I first started writing the script is that the endings seemed like there was no way out. There was no good way out, some great way out when I was first starting to write. I felt he could not win, but he also couldn't walk in there and the woman looks up and says, "I'm sorry, you lost," and then we fade to black. So those two options are out. In my original script, what happened is David, when they say he's lost, David finally gets up the gumption because he's been kind of a laid-back guy his whole life, not challenging people. He has to talk to the manager, and I had a big climactic scene where he has a big showdown with a guy and tries to scare him into a lawsuit, and the guy finally says, "Okay, I'll give you the truck." And so they get the truck, and then they go out, and David buys the air compressor. Well, it was Alexander's idea when we sat down and he gave me notes, and I did my first rewrite, that David would be the one to sacrifice his car to get his dad the truck, which I thought was a better ending. Now, when I was writing the script, I thought I would have to have some big fireworks at the end, because that's what's expected even on independent movies. So I wouldn't have even thought that I'd have the luxury of having that low a key of an ending to a movie. So I'm glad when you have someone like Alexander get on board and they can protect the script and they can say, no, we don't need to have something like that. This might be more believable. And the other thing Alexander did at the end, he did a rewrite before shooting. I had David pulling over in the truck on a rural road and letting Woody drive. And when they get back to town, Woody sits in the passenger seat, and David drives through town, and you see Ed Pegram come out, you see Angela McEwen and the newspaper woman come out, but Woody's sitting there kind of like the king with his hat on and in all of his glory. Well, Alexander combined those two scenes, so when they get to town, and now you have Woody driving the truck. And when I saw his rewrite, he passed it back to me for notes, and I saw that ending. I thought, that's perfect. That's great. I wish I'd thought of that.
So let's talk a little about Alexander Payne. So it must have been great collaborating with somebody who does understand screenwriting. He's a director, but gets it both ways.
Yeah, he knows a little bit about it.
He does a little, Didn't he write
dabbled.
a few? Dabbled?
What's that?
He wrote a few scripts or something?
Yeah.
Like Election,
About Schmidt, Sideways, Descendants. Yeah.
The terrific writer. So the choice for black and white, it was interesting in what you felt about that.
That was all up to Alexander, and I was great with it. I was a little worried about what it would do to box office, but on the other hand, I thought it would have a timeless feel and look like the classic movies that I grew up loving. And so artistically, I was really happy about that. Now, when and Alexander said this, it's no secret, when he went in to talk to the studio about it, they had their meeting and everything was going well, and they were all aboard having Alexander shoot what's a fairly low-budget movie for a studio, and they finished their meeting and everyone was saying, "Oh, that's great. Well, let's get going with this thing." And as they're about to stand up, Alexander said to the studio people, "Oh, and by the way, it's in black and white." And then everybody sat down again, and they continued the discussion. And what happened is Alexander had to bring his budget down $2 or $3 million to get it in line with what they thought would work for them releasing a movie in black and white.
Let's see. So how did the transition? Because if you wrote in 2002, it's 2014.
Yeah.
So with other directors attached to it, where they're trying to?
No, right after Julie got the script to Ron Yerxa, they optioned it, and within a month or two, they'd sent it to Alexander because they'd worked with him on Election. They produced that movie with him. And they said, do you want to executive produce this, which would mean maybe trying to help us find the money. And we were thinking in terms of a $2 million movie at that time. And they also said, maybe you know a Midwest director, someone up and coming who would relate to this material. Well, he did shock us all when he called them and said, I would like to direct it, but it won't be right away, and it won't be for $2 million. The original budget was $16 million, and we brought it down to 13 for black and white. The other thing he told us at the time is, I'm about to go out and shoot a movie called Sideways, and I will not shoot Nebraska after that because I'm tired of shooting in cars. Because when you're the director, you have to sit in a car or truck or what behind it. You usually can't be in the car with the actors, and it's very frustrating, especially for someone like Alexander. He works right there with the actors. So he said it will be the movie, after Sideways. And he kept to his word, but no one knew it would take him 10 years to get there, because it was 7 years before he made The Descendants after Sideways. And that wasn't by plan. He tried to get a couple of other projects going in that time. He even wrote another original of his own, but it was just cost too much money to get produced. So he came back, and his production company had the option on Descendants, and the director for that dropped out. And all of a sudden, Alexander stepped in to direct The Descendants at the last minute. But as soon as Descendants was finished, he called and said, okay, I'm going to do Nebraska. And he got geared up, and he spent a year or two scouting locations and auditioning actors.
Wow. And so how gratifying is for you, 2 of your actors got nominations of your characters?
It's great. I mean, like I say, when I sat down to write this, I was just trying to get a job. I thought if I'm lucky, it'll be a $1 or $2 million independent movie. And there was no thought in my head of me writing something that would get me nominated. But I also wasn't even thinking of terms of that the actors would. I just didn't think the movie could possibly be big enough to get into that realm. When I first talked to Ron and Albert about it before Alexander was attached, and they said, well, maybe we can get $2 million for this. There was a hope at that time that the Independent Spirit Awards might be in our future, lower budget movies.
Oh. Well, I mean, June Squibb was terrific. I mean, I noticed there was some allergy attacks in the audience during the scene where she kissed Woody in the forehead. I call it allergy, but some people call it crying.
Oh.
Is that, how did that scene come about for you, or is that kind of?
That was very nice. I mean, once I decided that Kate had to join him on the trip, I wanted to try and add some dimension to her character and have her stop yelling the whole time, and to show a softer side, and that she, there did need to be a scene between the 2 of them, even if one of them's unconscious, to show that there's this connection and a reason they've been together all those years. And also by giving David some of that background over the years, he could see that they were young once. There's this thing, a lot of us think our parents were born the same day we were, and we don't realize how randy they were, running around being crazy and doing this type of thing. And so David had got an inkling that once upon a time they were this young couple.
So let's talk a little about the Oscar season for you.
Yeah.
So how has that been, with all the praise and the awards and traveling all over the place?
Well, I had no idea, really. I didn't have any idea exactly what when I went out to try and sell the movie, I was out there for a few weeks. But I really had no idea what happens once you get a nomination. It just so happened that I know there's this flu that's been going around California. It's a wicked one, and I caught it the day before the nominations.
Oh.
So the morning of the nominations, I was asleep. I told my wife, if I get in, come and shove me awake, because it's 5:30 in the morning they announce, and if I don't get in, let me sleep because I don't feel good. So I got the wake-up call, and after that, it was crazy. I mean, the emails and the phone calls, I could barely talk. I was coughing so much, and I was trying to do interviews, and that's how it started, and it's been pretty much like that for, 3 weeks now. So I really didn't know it went on like that. I thought once the nomination was in, everybody relaxed. And
And you're off to London next?
Yes, the BAFTA Awards are next week. It's the only one my wife cared about because she's an Anglophile. She said, if you get anything, get the BAFTA so we can go to London.
Something about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm having fun, but let's open it up a little to the audience.
You put a lot of yourself and a lot of your background into this one. Do you have another project in the works that you're writing right now?
Well, another guy who came from our show in Seattle Almost Live is Joe McHale. He's on Community and The Soup. And he'd asked me to write a script for him, and I did that. And we took that out a few months ago. We got the Juno producers, Mr. Mudd is John Malkovich's company. So we're out as a package now for me to direct again on that one. And Joel to star. And that's about a Native American reservation that just built their first high school, and now they're fielding their first girls softball team. And that's comes from a real life experience, a friend of mine. But just this morning, I had my first meeting on another script that I wrote since then, that we just took out last week, and we're talking to actors and financiers, which is, in a way, what you're saying. I'm going back into more of my own personal life. It's almost like a prequel to Nebraska, only with completely different characters and setting. But in this case, it's more like a 40-year-old father and his 10-year-old son. And if any of you have seen the old Italian movie Bicycle Thief, or Bicycle Thieves, it's also known as. Father loses his bike and his son, the two of them go out for the weekend trying to find it because it's his means of transportation and employment. So this new one, right now it's called The Confirmation. And again, I went back into my past and some of the things that I remembered as a boy at 10, going through with my dad. And so we're just hitting the pavement with that one.
What was the purpose of the girlfriend character at the beginning?
The girlfriend, when I first wrote it, the point was to give David a reason to get out of town. So I was kind of creating his job. He's not happy at his job. His dad's driving him crazy with all this talk, and now he's just broke up with his girlfriend. So that was part of it. And in the original script, the girlfriend shows up with the mother, and she is there with them, and they're also their stories having a little bit of an arc on that end. Alexander decided that the girlfriend wasn't necessary towards the end, and what he did was he gave. In my original script, David worked in a cubicle, and you didn't even know where he worked, and Ross was an insurance salesman, and there was no really sibling rivalry. Alexander created a situation with the brother, kind of a semi-celebrity in Billings on the air, so that there's a little bit of tension, even though the brothers get along and they're really good friends. But there's, David, feels like his life is falling apart, and Ross seems to be doing well. And then when they have their moment together, rescuing the compressor for their dad, that completes their story arc, and all of that's kind of by the wayside. So he felt the girlfriend at the end would be redundant, and he saw what was happening in Hawthorne through David's eyes, and he said the girlfriend is really just kind of duplicating what she's also observing. So you have two people observing, and that's probably not necessary. So that was his decision, and again, I think a good one.
I'm curious to find out how you are taking to, it's been a while now since you've written this for your first actual full-length screenplay, but going from the smaller, the jokes and the skits to the longer narrative. Do you have a preference either way, or do you do both? Do you switch back and forth, or are you kind of more into the full-length feature?
Right now, it's the full-length feature. When I really loved writing sketches and jokes. It's just a lot of fun. And doing that show you're talking about, I was on it 10 years because it was it wasn't like a job. You could work 60 hours a week and it was just fun. But when I did finally sit down to write Nebraska, as I was getting into it and I finally broke the story and was writing it, it really was like a revelation to me. I thought, this is something that I really enjoy doing. And I was sorry it took so long. So I mean, most of you here are in college, right? Or
50-50 community.
50-50,
and
yeah. So I guess my advice to you here is, I wrote my first screenplay at 45. So my advice to you, don't wait till you're 45, and then do not necessarily find a director who's going to wait another 10 years to make it. So I really wish that I had started earlier. So when I optioned this, I was really hungry to write some more movie scripts. And that's why I had a really nice run doing assignments for the studios, in which you go in and they tell you what books or magazine articles or a foreign film that they want to adapt. And that was great for me, and it's great work, but most of those never get produced, so you're in what's called development hell. But on the other hand, I have a very hard time coming up with ideas that I think will make feature-length films. And Alexander Payne has asked this all the time, why don't you make more movies? And he said, I'll make a movie every year if I have a story I believe in. So that's what holds him back as well. So when we found out he was gearing up to shoot Nebraska, I told my agent I'm not going to take any more assignments for the next couple of years. I'm going to start writing originals again. And that's what I did, and that's why I just went out with the Joe McHale script, and then the new one we just started with this week. And I also had an idea for a TV pilot, and so we're going out with that next week. So I was trying to time it all to match Nebraska coming out, because I do love this format, and as much fun as sketch comedy writing is, there really is a gratification to tell a full story and to develop characters and to have it pay off. Yeah, that's I'd love to have a chance to write a sketch here and there once in a while in the future, but this is what I really like doing now. Yeah.
Now, your first script has been nominated for the Academy Award, and you've got some other projects, but you've had a long career before this in sketch comedy and stuff. Do you have specific goals for what you'd like to do next, besides more genres, people you'd like to work with, things you haven't done yet as a writer that you'd like to do?
The other thing that happened, my agent became a manager, so he's my manager. So just recently I went around to the agencies and I signed with WME. And part of that's to give me some backing to do what I want to do, which is I want to just write the kind of movies that I want to see. I want to go back to the original reason that I wrote Nebraska. It was because this is the kind of movie I wanted to see. And my thought in these new scripts that I've written is they could be made for any budget. They could be made for $100,000, $1 million, $2 million. They could be $5 million, maybe $8 million. If I'm directing it for the first time, they're probably going to be under $10 million and closer to $5 million. But my goal is, if I can make small films like that the rest of my life, I'd be happy. There are people doing it. Nicole Holofcener, making her movies. Tom McCarthy, making smaller movies. There are a bunch of people that I really admire. They've found their niche. They know what they want to do. And I know the kind of movies I want to do. And I know, in a way, I'm starting out with a $13 million studio film. And what I've told these people I'm working with, think of me as a guy in my 20s, not a guy who's 57, who really just wants to start over again from scratch, whatever budget I can get, make small films. My ultimate goal would be to get back into the area that Alexander Payne is operating in, $10 to $15 million movies, like Jason Reitman was doing with Juno and Up in the Air. If I could do movies like that, I'd be very happy. But I'd also, if I spent the rest of my life doing $2 million movies that I really believed in, that would be fine too.
Was there anything that an actor brought to their character that you hadn't originally intended for that character, or that surprised you?
You know, actually they all did. I mean, the other nice thing when you're operating at this level with an Alexander Payne, he's one of the best casting directors, and he has a casting director that he works with, John Jackson, that has been with him since his first movie. So you know that no matter who they pick, it's going to be amazing. You're going to see things you hadn't imagined. I mean, you can start with Will Forte because that's such an underplayed part. It's such a low-key character, but every time I see the movie, I'm so appreciative of the things that Will Forte brought to it that I hadn't even thought of and that weren't on the page. And then you think, I've always loved Bob Odenkirk. I knew as soon as I saw his name that he would know how to play that brother and to bring something to it. So he's not a jerk necessarily, but he's a mixture of things, and he doesn't have that many lines or scenes to bring that across. And Bob Odenkirk is the perfect kind of guy. Stacy Keach is one of our finest Shakespearean actors, so you know that he's going to be there, and you're glad for whatever he does, and he did some amazing things. Now, June Squibb has some amazing things. When she finishes her speech at the cemetery and she does that happy little walk off, I mean, that's something I didn't write, and I'm not even sure Alexander told her to do a little skip away from the headstones. So that was probably something that she brought. And another thing I don't think a writer or a director could tell an actor to do is when she's sitting in the back of the car, when her sons are hiding in the barn and they're talking to those people and they run out of things to say, and June Squibb is about to say something and her mouth just makes these motions and then stops. I could spend 10 pages explaining that, and I couldn't get it. That's not in the script. That's something an actor brings. And then when you get to Bruce Dern, there are too many things for me to even talk about that he brought to this role that weren't on the page or surpassed whatever I had in mind. I'm so glad when I wrote the scene where they walk through his old house, that started out with a lot of talking, and Kate was blabbing on as usual, and the brothers were talking, and I kept cutting it down. When Alexander did his pass, he cut it down, and I noticed from the final shooting draft through editing, when I first saw it, they even cut some lines. And that's because you don't need those lines, because everything that you need to know is right there on Bruce Dern's face. And sometimes you just have to let the actor tell the story. If you can get away with it, let them show you. And Bruce did that in many other places in the movie, but that's one that I am always grateful for, that he was able to bring that across in that crucial scene.
Seeing as it was a very personal film, I was wondering if there were any scenes that were particularly difficult to rewrite after getting notes back.
After getting notes back?
Yeah. And all to rewrite yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think the scene through the house was the toughest. Most of the other scenes I kind of knew what I wanted to do. The railroad scene with the teeth was a little difficult because I was always looking for little places to plant a little humor in this, and like I say, in real life we didn't do the joking, so that one was a little tough. I mean, how much, what kind of little humor can we put in this without making it seem like he's making fun of his dad, and also that it worked out because the little fun that he is poking at his dad, he gets right back at him. And that scene was important to me too, because I wanted to show at that point that Woody still had something up there, that there was still a mind at work, and there's still a person in there. And by him kind of doing it right back to his son, I thought that was the way to get that across. To me, I just wanted in this whole setup to, even though Woody is based on my dad, he's not exactly like my dad. He's more curmudgeonly. So I have to explain that to people. I don't want them to think of my dad as going through his whole life like that. So it's always a balancing act for me to make sure that you saw Woody as a real person, that you understood that he was actually a very generous person who had been burned quite a bit in his life by that generosity.
I wanted to know, before you knew that Bruce Dern was perfect for Woody Grant, did you, as you were writing it, have someone else in mind as you were writing? Because I know it's based on your dad, so sometimes it's hard to separate the personal from the art.
Yeah.
But did you have someone in mind that you thought?
Well, I did. It wasn't necessarily with the intent that I'm going to get this actor to be in my movie, but as you say, sometimes you try to imagine people. And so part of it was my dad's voice, but also as far as the look, Robert Duvall looked a lot like my dad. So I thought of Robert Duvall, and there's a couple of reasons. Robert Duvall was also, if you've seen Tender Mercies, and I'm a big Horton Foote fan who wrote Tender Mercies, and another film that has a little bit of Nebraska in it, Trip to Bountiful. But Horton Foote also wrote the adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird, and Robert Duvall had his start in that movie. So there was all these little connections in my mind. So I did use his face and kind of my father's voice, but it was such a long shot that it would ever be made.
Well, we always end our show with one question. It's a movie theater question. So can you share with us a movie theater experience you had, maybe with your dad growing up, that really meant a lot to you, or some experience going to the movies, or a movie that really you connected with as a child?
Yeah, I mean, we did. Anybody know the Seattle area? There's a town south of Seattle called Kent, where I grew up. And the woman who asked the story about Almost Live probably knows Kent, because we used to make fun of it all the time. But they had a little theater there when I was growing up. It was really the only theater I knew, called the Rialto. And we would go down there. I remember, and probably the film I remember the most was both touching and had its humorous parts, was Old Yeller. Yeah. And of course, it's not funny at the end. But they did incorporate, some little bits of humor along the way, and so I do recall that movie seeing with my dad.
It's interesting because you touch on a lot of personal stuff, and Old Yeller was also a very personal story. So it's interesting as a writer you connected to that.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you all from the internet who are watching us live, and especially Academy members. It's great that you were able to join us. Of course, thank the Apollo Theater interns. They're the ones. You can see them. They're awesome. And thank you, Paramount, for giving this movie in 9 days, helping us put this together. That's awesome. And thank you, everybody who made this wonderful movie. Cast and crew, everybody behind you can tell that everybody had a love for it. And even the cinematography, the sound, flawless cast and crew. And, of course, our awesome screenwriter, Bob Nelson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.